My name's Amanda Lynn, and this is the story of how I remembered my life as Sallie Dandridge, fiance of John Pelham during the Civil War. This is a documentary about my experiences in rediscovering places I had been in that lifetime, the lessons I learned along the way, my thoughts and messages from Spirit that I received as I traveled. I hope this story has value to you. I know that it has changed my life. I hope that our story will help you remember that love is limitless. In May of 2015, I went on a trip with my aunt, and we ended up in this Civil War museum. And I looked at this wall they had, and it had several faces and stories of a number of different soldiers in the war. And as I read the wall, I walked up and I looked at this boy's face. And immediately I felt this response, I know him. I just looked at his picture and I thought, I know him. And it was this very visceral feeling, like I just knew. But then, like your brain kicks in and you're like, there's no way I could know him. So I started looking closer at the picture, like, does he look like someone I know? Is there some reason why I recognize this face? Because I've been interested in Civil War history for, ever since I can remember. So it wouldn't have been unusual for me to have maybe come across him before, but I had never seen his picture. I never even heard of his name before that day. And I remember leaving the museum kind of feeling like, this is weird. And I actually took pictures of the plaques that I read, and I found out he did pass away in the war in 1863. And later on, I looked him up, and again, I was just trying to figure out, what connection could this possibly have? Is there any way I could have heard of him before? And I came up with nothing. I just looked at his face, and I knew that we had met before. And the weird thing about it, too, is, Civil War photographs are always in black and white. And for some reason, I knew that he had blonde hair and blue eyes. When I looked at the picture, I could visualize his face in color. That experience kind of freaked me out, so I didn't really talk about it much, and I didn't really share it with most people. I've always been kind of scared of ghosts, so I didn't really want to pursue learning really anything further than just looking up his name. But, something kept bringing me back to, this boy's face. And why do I know him? I was walking in the park and I was listening to Celine Dion, and the song It's All Coming Back to Me Now was playing. And as I was walking, all of a sudden I got this flash, like a memory. And it was me sitting on a bench and John facing me and smiling. And I got this feeling, like this overwhelming sense of love in this vision. Like I was looking over at him sitting on this bench, and he was looking back at me with this adoring smile. And that was it. And that definitely freaked me out, because I thought, okay, it's one thing to maybe recognize a photograph, but there's no record of what John's smile looked like. In the Civil War era, you couldn't smile for a photograph because of the way the shutter speed worked. And so I saw him smiling at me, and I just knew that's what it was. I want so badly for other people to understand this experience and that it's real, I have felt the feelings I felt in that past life of losing somebody. And, you know, going down this road, opening all of this up again, it's like reopening these ancient wounds. What it really feels like is it feels like burying your loved one over and over again, because every time you relive the beautiful moments you've shared together, you're also reliving the fact that you didn't have more of them, that your love for this other person was cut short way too soon. I mean, I lost him when I was 23 years old. He was 24. I think that part of the reason why John is coming back around and speaking to me and communicating with me is because a lot of the issues and divisions that existed in the time of the Civil War are coming back around in the America we're living in today. And I think it makes sense that if these wounds weren't healed back then, you know, 600,000 men died in the Civil War. Not to mention those that were wounded, not to mention all of the affected people's families who were then subsequently wounded by the pain that their loved ones went through. Our entire country suffered deeply for 4 years and beyond. And I think the blood that was shed on American soil, the tears that were shed on American soil, I think it lives on until it's healed. It gets passed, trauma can be passed through people's DNA. And I think on a spiritual level, if people aren't healing from sudden and unexpected deaths, if people aren't healing from the pain caused by so much destruction and slaughter, it comes back around to be healed. And so these issues, they're present here still. They're alive here still, and we need to do something about that. And I think in a small way, maybe that's part of my call. Every time I go to a Civil War historic site, especially a battlefield, I feel it. I feel the presence of the people who fought there and died there. And it's kind of, it's something you can't really explain. We are headed to Alabama, y'all. I'm really excited. I am not really sure what is going to await me when I get there, but I feel like this trip is going to be really important. I'm going to take some of this time while I'm driving to just talk to you about a few things. A little over a week ago, I had a past life regression session done, and I feel like I'm still integrating a lot of what came up, and I'm still trying to understand a lot of it, what it all means. But there is definitely one thing I can say for sure, and that's the things that I've been feeling about my connection with John turned out to be true. And it was a lot of what came up were things I felt like I already knew, but I wanted proof or confirmation that what my intuition was telling me was real. So I guess that's lesson number one there, right? To trust yourself, even if it doesn't make a whole lot of sense or you don't feel like people will believe you. And that's really hard for me because I have a problem with feeling like I need to justify myself or like I need to explain myself, and that maybe that's left over from this past lifetime. 1860s women really didn't have a say in things and kind of had to do what they were told for the most part. And so maybe that's where some of that comes from, is like feeling this need to justify why I deserve to be heard, or why my experience has value or credibility. I think a lot of what came up helped me to understand why there's a deep sadness in me around the Civil War era. Having lost someone really close to me to war, it makes me understand. It's kind of an indescribable feeling to, in that session, basically from the first moment on, I was just inconsolably crying. And it was like that wound there clearly needs to be healed and has been needing to be healed for a long time. And I think this is happening to me on an individual level, but I also feel like this is a collective wound, that the pain of the Civil War is still very much present with us here. And I think I talked about that before. It's also brought up a lot of really complicated feelings in me, because of course I believe that slavery was a horrible evil. It still is a horrible evil. There are still places where that's going on, and I think on some level that the Civil War needed to be fought. The pain really needed to come home for some people in order for that big... I just think slavery is a scourge, and it needed to happen. It was the experience that we as a country needed to have in order to grow. The complicated part of it is that I was in love with a Confederate officer. So how do you justify that, How do you honor the person that you loved and still love? I still feel his love present in my life. Actually, I discovered that he's actually been supporting me pretty well since I was a child. That's been a little bit of my struggle, is I think fear of being judged for honoring the life of a Confederate officer. What does that mean? Does that make you a racist? Does that mean that you believe in their cause? Does that mean... What does that mean? What are the connotations associated with that, and what will people think? Because I do have a hard time. I have a hard time with anybody who thinks that they can justify enslaving another person. I don't believe that the Southern cause was in the right, and I'm glad that the war turned out the way it did. But on an individual level, what does it mean? Does that mean every person who served in the Confederacy is evil? No, I also don't think life is that black and white. But, it's kind of like, this is me like unpacking all of this. Why is this person showing up back in my life again? What does all this mean? And I think when things like this come up, it's for healing. That's very clear. But I don't know, we'll see what I discover along the way. I just feel very strongly that our story is one that needs to be talked about and shared. And because it's something I've really been hesitant to talk about in a public way, I think that's exactly what needs to happen. Opening all this up again, it's something that was buried pretty deep down. And I think, yeah, it's hard to explain to somebody who's maybe not having this experience or has never experienced anything like it. But you have to reopen wounds in order to stitch them up and heal them. And so that has been a very exhausting, painful process at times, to feel grief all over again for somebody you lost 155 years ago. But I think it brings up a larger question of the cost of war. It's kind of, I keep thinking about that quote from Romeo and Juliet. It's like, all are punished. Nobody on either side, no matter what you believed or where you were coming from, nobody escaped pain. Nobody escaped being answerable for some of the unspeakable things that were happening in our country at the time. But I also think that even those who fight for a misguided cause have their reasons why. I don't think it's right to vilify either. When you start learning about the individual human beings involved, it becomes a lot easier to have compassion and empathy and understanding. When you group people together and say, well, you are a Confederate, therefore you're evil, that's an easy cop-out. That's not facing the shadow side in all of our humanity. As far as John goes, what everybody on both sides of the conflict has written about him was that he was this noble character. I think it was the Battle of Fredericksburg I read about. He basically called a ceasefire because there were some citizens of the town who still hadn't escaped, and there was a woman and some children who were afraid and running away from the shelling, and he called a ceasefire. He got both sides. He called the ceasefire, and then the other side ceased firing, and he personally escorted those people out to make sure that they would be safe. I think it's hard to imagine that today, because I feel like warfare today is much more of like guerrilla warfare, where you don't even know who the enemy is anymore. You know, regular citizens can have a bomb strapped to them, that kind of stuff. And the time of the Civil War, that was not the case. It was very much, you know, this is two armies in battle, but we protect our citizens. And on more than one occasion, John did that. Personally, like, he personally made sure that people were safe. You would think someone would become so hardened by what they had seen that they wouldn't care anymore. John was 24 when he passed away. Sallie was 23, his love, Sallie. And I'm 23 now. So I feel like that's part of the reason why some of this is coming up. But, you know, John was comparatively very young. But he, at one point, basically, he held a 15-year-old boy while he died. And how do you, I don't know how on earth you cope with that. I don't know how you hold a 15-year-old boy in your arms and tell him, you know, to die bravely. The big questions that have come up for me in all of it is like, what was it for? What is it for? And I don't really know the answer. One of the things that most blows my mind about John Pelham is They say he could sit up on his horse in the middle of battle, like cannons exploding around him, balls flying, the whole deal. He could sit there up on his horse and look as calm as if he was trotting through the park on a Sunday. And I hope, sometimes I'm like, please give me some of that courage. If you can do that, if you can be in the midst of hell and have this calm face and encourage the people around you and be a leader in this solid rock, if you could do that, maybe I'm capable of a lot more than I thought I was. And maybe what's going on in my life isn't as big of a mountain as I thought. Courage, what's courage? I don't think courage is this, blind recklessness. It's not rushing into danger for the sake of it. But they say that about him too. He didn't do that. He was really courageous in some of the things he did, but he never risked the lives of his men for it. It was always like, okay, we're gonna do this, but as soon as we take too many losses, we're pulling out. It wasn't bravery at the expense of others. It wasn't reckless bravery, I guess, which to me isn't brave at all. That's just like not valuing yourself or human life. But bravery, true bravery to me, is being willing to be vulnerable, taking your armor off and putting yourself out there for, to be, possibly destroyed, but also possibly, it's like taking a risk for something better. Vulnerability for the sake of maybe growing, or for the sake of maybe changing something important. When I did my regression, the woman who was leading me through it, she says normally when people are experiencing a great amount of pain, either physically or emotionally, in their regressions, she will sometimes tell them to rise up out of their body and hover above the situation, so that you're kind of detached, you don't feel so much of the pain. But during mine, she said she just felt guided to let me experience it. And I'm like, oh, great, thanks. But I think that was actually really important, and she was right, that I really had to feel the depths of that sorrow in order to transmute it. Having to relive the feelings over again. I think it was important to help purge it a little bit from my system. But also, I think feeling truly embracing and feeling your pain and honoring it is what allows us to be more compassionate towards others. If I have truly felt a deep grief, then I can be there for somebody else who is experiencing grief. One other thing I will say though is, through all this, I feel like the biggest takeaway is just knowing for sure something that I always hoped was true, and I guess maybe on a deeper level I knew it was true. Love is this completely limitless thing, and it's completely deathless, timeless. Love can't be destroyed. And true, loving, unconditional connection between two people, two souls, no circumstance can end it. I think that's really John's gift to me, is it might change, it might transform, because I can't be with somebody who's not here with me. In the physical, I can't be with them. But how lucky am I to know for certain that we are so much more than our bodies? That great love exists? Because I feel like a lot of people don't even want to let themselves believe that that kind of love exists. I know it. I felt it. I remember. I'm really grateful for that part of this. But I think that's been a big struggle in my life, is feeling like men don't choose me. That I'm either not enough or I'm too much. That in some way I need to edit myself to be desirable. And I think a big message he had is, no, you don't. And whether someone else is choosing you or not, you have to choose yourself. There are people who will love you just for who you are, just to love you. Man, like I said, it's mind-blowing to me to be so much, to be so enough for someone, that they would stick around to let me know, that they would try to be present in my life past, being taken away. I don't even know if there are words for that. But I hope you can feel what I'm trying to say. There he is up on the hill. Okay. So I'm gonna try to put into words what just happened, if I can. I am here at the Jacksonville City Cemetery, and I just got done saying hi to John. And I left him a little note I read for him, and I left him a little one of the little soldiers he's given me throughout the years, and I left him a bouquet of flowers. And I lit a candle for him, and it's one thing that's funny is it's actually it's fairly windy today, so I thought when I lit the candle that it might go out, and it didn't. So that was nice. It stayed burning there while I did my thing. And I just sat there with him for a few moments. And I could really feel him there with me. And the first thing he said was, "I've been here with you the whole time. You didn't have to come here to find me." He said, "The first time I saw you, I thought that's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." And I could picture him kind of bowing in front of me, like, will you dance with me? May I have this dance?" And he said, "We will dance together again." And he said, "I will find you again and again and again." And don't get me wrong, because I'm not crying because I'm sad. I'm crying because
because it's so beautiful to know that you're loved that way. And as soon as I drove into Jacksonville, I could really feel he's at peace. That had been my fear early on in this experience, that he was maybe an earthbound spirit who was trapped here or confused or lost. But I think really he's more of a spirit guide, that he's been at peace, but he's here to guide me to greater love, to greater courage, to reach my potential. And this whole time I've been worrying about, I think that's kind of what he was trying to get through today. Like, you've been all worried about me. I'm just fine. But you need to know that you're loved. Yeah. I love that guy. But it makes my heart really happy to know that wherever he is, it's peaceful. And I think that's just like John, he wouldn't want to stay. He would want to be put to use, he would want to be helping somebody. So I am in Richmond, Virginia now, and I just got finished doing a little tour of the state capitol, and that was a bit of a weird experience. The tour guide was great, all that, but the last time I would have been there at the Capitol would have been in 1863 for John's funeral, because he was lying in state there at the Capitol building, and that's where Sallie rode to go say goodbye. It was really weird because when I walked around the building, I recognized the front of it from the regression I did. Like, the picture of the building was very clear, and I remember the white building with the big columns. And I remember being in this big black morning dress and like having to go up all these stairs and feeling winded because I had to go up all these stairs, and I had to get there. And another thing I remembered was the floor was black and white, like tiling. I don't know if it was marble or not, but I remembered that. So it was a bit of a weird feeling to be there. And as the lady was giving the tour, I could feel like my heartbeat kind of speed up a little bit. And I felt a little bit sick to my stomach being there for some reason. I think just like the memory of the grief I felt there. That was the Virginia Capitol building. I think it's important for me to kind of record as I'm going along what some of my thoughts are. Like, what is the lesson here? Why is this coming up? And one of the big things I've been thinking about is just, I think maybe this is always a lesson from history, but I think the lesson here that's really important is that we can't put people in boxes and label them based on knowing one thing about them. We can't vilify people without fully understanding the context of why they believed what they believed. And it doesn't mean that every belief every person has ever held has been the right one, but I just think that there's a blurred line between good and evil, and nobody's all good or all bad. No, we can't oversimplify things when we look back, and we can't put the finger of judgment and blame at anyone, because I really just feel like everybody's doing
the very best they can in the circumstances they're in. And we really had to try to put ourselves in those people's shoes to understand why they did the things they did. It's now several weeks after I took my trip up to Virginia and West Virginia and Maryland. And I've been kind of putting off talking about it because I feel like I'm still really processing all of what I experienced, and I think there's a lot more to learn still. But I guess I'll talk about kind of what my thoughts are at this point in the journey. So the first stop that I took when I moved out of Richmond was I went to the Fredericksburg battlefield, and that was quite a powerful experience. Fredericksburg was really the height of John's military career. It's where he earned the title the Gallant Pelham, and it's also where I think he kind of did his greatest act of bravery in the war. Fredericksburg is where he took a single cannon and moved to a very forward position where very little help could come to him and his crew, and he commenced firing on pretty much, an entire army with a single cannon, and he lived to tell the tale. So Fredericksburg is, I think, really what immortalized John. The interesting thing is that the parcel of land where that actually happened has not been purchased by the National Park System. So I had to ask at the visitor center where I could find it, and they said, wow, that's really off the beaten track. Today there's actually a Family Dollar there, but it is labeled Pelham's Corner, and they have a cannon there. So I did get to spend a few moments there, and it was interesting because I kind of felt John with me when I was in that space. And, I was kind of thinking about, wow, it's so brave what you did here. And he seemed pretty somber about it. And he just kind of quietly gave me the thought, it was quite a day. Like he was pretty aware of what gallant deeds in war translates to. So that was quite interesting, And I guess it's consistent with who he was. He wasn't one to brag about his bravery or anything like that. And so just the quiet phrase, it was quite a day. And I suppose it was. On the way to Pelham's Corner is the Slaughter Pen farmhouse, which is also part of the Fredericksburg battlefield. In each of the Civil War sites that I go to, I say a little prayer for those who were lost there, and I ask that they be released if they're still around. And almost every place where I did that, a huge flock of birds would go by pretty close to the moment that I was saying the prayer. So that's pretty cool. It felt like a release was happening. But at the Slaughter Pen, there was a huge flock of birds that went by. But there was also this gray cat that seemed to live in the abandoned house there. And it had these very piercing green eyes. But when I walked closer, it came off the porch and walked under the deck. And as soon as I walked away, it got back into the same kind of spot, and it looked almost like a sentinel there watching over the field. So that was interesting. It felt like someone was still there. I found that some of the places where John fought, but also that are, pertinent to his life, are somewhat difficult to find. You wouldn't happen upon them accidentally. The next place I went was Kelly's Ford, which is where John was mortally wounded. I actually had to get out and ask directions at this inn because I couldn't find the things I was looking for. And I know there's a marker close to the spot where he would have been hit by the shell fragment. And it started to rain when I got there. And where the marker is down a trail, so you have to walk a little bit down this kind of unmarked trail to find it. Well, I got out and I got my umbrella, like determined to go. And I'm walking through the mud. And I could just feel John walking beside me. And he seemed uncomfortable. I don't know if there were still like spirits of people in the woods that he didn't want me to interact with, or if it just made him sad. I think maybe it just made him sad to be there. And I got only so far, and then it just was way too muddy and I had to turn around. There's a monument in Culpeper that is just to his memory. That's pretty beautiful, so I got to go see that. John died in Bessie Shackelford's house in Culpeper, and while the house doesn't stand there anymore, they do have a plaque for John's memory. And then the hotel across the street is where John stayed when he was in town, and that building is still there, but it's actually broken up into several little shops now. So I went into the music shop that's in what was the old Virginia Hotel, and I bought a little something there just to say I did. As I was walking down those streets, I thanked Bessie in my mind that he didn't have to die alone because she was there and she held his hand. So I'm really grateful that he was surrounded by loved ones and he wasn't alone. The next place I went was Martinsburg, West Virginia, and that's where Sallie's buried. The most important thing I wanted to do when I went to Martinsburg is visit Sallie's grave. And also in the course of my research for going, I discovered that there's a child's grave there as well. Nothing I read seemed to indicate that Sallie ever actually gave birth to a child. Everything said she had miscarriages. So that was news to me, and I did want to see what that was about. I was able to find the graveyard quite easily, but there were all these get out, keep out signs, no trespassing, which kind of made me sad, because to me I thought, wow, while John's grave is, well kept up and visited constantly, people will go find him every now and then. I wondered to myself, when was the last time someone came looking for Sallie Dandridge? When was the last time somebody remembered her? And so, of course it said keep out, but I went in anyway, because I thought, who's gonna say I can't leave flowers at a grave? And it took me a few minutes, but I found her pretty easily. And she's there with her husband and some of the other members of her family. But there was a pretty stark contrast between the feeling at Sallie's gravesite and the feeling at John's. John's gravesite felt very at peace. I was relieved when I got there. It seemed like, he had moved on, everything was okay. But Sallie's felt very unsettled. It felt like there was still a lot of pain there, which was surprising. I guess it shouldn't have been surprising to me, but a lot of my questions in all this are, why is John in spirit and I'm still here? What's the reason for, if if I know about this connection, then why aren't we together in spirit? Why did I come back? And I guess I'm still discovering that, and maybe we'll keep discovering that my whole life. It's a strange thing to stand at your own grave and feel like it's not peaceful. And one thing too is that there was a child's grave next to Sallie's, and it was a little girl. And so after all that Sallie lost, when she lost John, when she finally had a child, she lost her child too, her baby. I know that I carry a lot of the grief from that lifetime still, and I've actually been working with some energetic tools and with some spiritual healers to clear some of that. But this journey has meant that I have to relive that grief, because it's lodged in there, like it's in my spirit somewhere. And yeah, it's hard to talk about because it seems strange to still be mourning somebody who I lost over 150 years ago. It's not something you can talk about very freely in daily life. I can't come into work and say, oh, sorry, I'm a little sad today. I'm mourning my true love from a past life. But I think a lot of what Sallie is teaching me is about freedom to voice my truth, because in her lifetime she couldn't most of the time. There would have come a point when her grief wasn't honored anymore because she never married John, and she would have had to move on because it's no longer becoming for a woman to be upset about someone she didn't marry. I think she suffered silently a lot, and the blessing of the lifetime I'm in now is that I don't have to. I can say, I have the power to say whatever is true for me as a woman, as a being, and that's really powerful for me to realize. And so in some ways I feel that my mission is to be her voice, to tell her story. What my soul needs to learn is that I never have to lose a love again. In fact, this human experience makes us feel like we've lost loved ones. It feels very much like I lost John. But when you look at it from another perspective, the truth is, I never lost him. He's with me here, I'm now. And so if somebody can cross death and years and ages and dimensions and whatever else he crossed to find me again, then love can't be torn apart. It's not possible. It's this illusion of separation that causes us pain. And so I've seen the truth, and the truth is that our loved ones, we can't lose them. And how powerful of a truth is that? Even when we feel separate or we feel loss, the truth is that they're here, supporting and loving us just like they were in life. And I feel overwhelmed a lot of the time, but incredibly blessed to be able to be a witness to that. I'm a witness to a limitless love. My spirit knows that love is limitless, but it is much harder to integrate that knowledge into the human experience. But how might we live our lives differently if we weren't afraid, number one, but how would we live our lives differently if we knew we couldn't lose the ones we love? That could shift a lot of things. That has really far-reaching implications. And so my little corner of the world, I don't know what it all means. I don't know how it all stretches outward from me, but if anyone can hear what I have to say and hear that they don't ever have to feel alone, that they are loved in a broader way than they'll ever be able to understand, I think that's what John and Sallie want me to know and want you to know. Love can't be lost. Love defies any obstacle. Just take that in and feel that. I mean, that's powerful. And I don't know about you, person who's listening, but I've had times in my life where I felt very alone. And now, I rarely feel that. Because whenever I start to feel lonely, I think there is a warrior angel up in the heavens, and he's looking down at me with bright blue eyes. And he's saying, I'm here, and I love you. And what harm can come to me when that's the truth? And how much more love can I give out when that's the love being given me? At times on this journey, it's been painful to remember. But I think if there's anything I've learned is that the more uncomfortable I feel, the further into that discomfort I need to go. That's where the answers lie, is in the discomfort, in moving through the discomfort. That's how we heal. And so any of the pain that's being brought up, it's coming up to be healed. There's something I heard one time, and it was, He did not put the swords in your heart. You did. And when He pulled them out, it felt like He was stabbing you, when really He pulled them out so you could heal. And I think in some ways that's what's happening here, is I wasn't given these memories of my time with John so that I would feel that pain all over again. That wasn't the intention or the purpose. The purpose was to be given these memories, to remember, so that that pain that was stuck in me could be removed, so it could be stitched up and changed into something new to transform. The last little piece of my journey, visiting all the places that John had been, or John and I had been, I stopped off at the Bower, which was my father's house at the time of the Civil War. It's where John and I fell in love, walking by the creek. And first of all, it was very difficult to even visit the house. I had tried contacting the people who live there and own it and run a farm there now, and I received no response. So I went anyway, because I'm me. And when I got there, the house was sad. It felt like there was this empty, sad, somber energy there. but I parked my car near the creek. And oddly enough, I felt like I recognized the spot as exactly the place where John and I used to sit and talk or walk by the creek. And it's paved now, and it wasn't back then, but it was the same spot. And I just thought about the time we spent together there and the beautiful moments we shared. And I also thought about the times that I spent walking along that creek, remembering him. And that particular place did feel peaceful, and I just stood there and listened to the creek run, and I thought, this creek was running this way, 150 years ago. It's still here now. What a lesson in flowing, in time, how time has a way of healing, and how nature and life keeps flowing, whether we'd like to stop it or not. So that's what I thought about when I was there. Shortly after that, I left to stay at a homestead called Welburn, which is still owned by the same family who owned it in the Civil War era. And John and Stuart's encampment moved on to that area of Virginia shortly after they would have been at the Bower at my family's home. And there's still a window there where John had etched a little message using a diamond ring. He had etched the name of his aide at the time, the date, October 28th, 1862, and he started to write his name, just got to the J and was interrupted. So I stayed overnight at this bed and breakfast, which was amazing, an incredible place. Lots of history there, lots of energy there. But I felt that in that place, John, I could imagine him pacing by the window, thinking about me, wondering if he'd ever see me again. And once my stay there was done, I walked out. They have a huge horse farm there today. And I walked out into this pasture, and I was just walking, and a beautiful day, the sky just opened up, and all these horses were out there eating, and, just having this conversation with John, what am I supposed to be learning from this experience? Why have you come back to me? What am I supposed to be doing with this? And he gave me this beautiful channeled message, which I'll read for you now. You didn't find me here or find us at the Bower because we aren't there. We are now. Our love is now, not some distant dead past. I don't want you to think you have to go where we've been to find us. Write a new story, one where love isn't lost. I began this journey sitting in this chair talking to you, and I'm ending it here too, which I felt was appropriate. Thank you for listening to my thoughts. I hope that in some way our message has reached you, and that you feel a greater connection to love, that you see the possibilities in front of you, that you recognize your own inherent timelessness, divinity, and that we can use these love stories to love again and again and again.